Welcome to Sherlock Mondays, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblio-venture through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. This is episode 4, The Sign of 4, part 2, and joining me as co-host is Mary Alcaro. Hi, Mary.
Hey, Ed, how are you?
Welcome to the show. I am very happy to finally have you on it. No, I mean, like in general, happy to have you on it. Yes.
I'm glad.
Mary thought the show started at 7:30 tonight, so she thought
I thought it was early.
Showing up at 7, so all right, we would have figured it out. Well, everyone, for 30 weeks, we will deduce, decipher, dissect Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his able assistant, Dr. John Watson. It will be a kind of conversational annotation. If you are watching live right now, please like and subscribe the videos and have fun in the live chat. And if you're watching the recording, also please like and subscribe. And Sherlock Mondays is also an audio podcast. And thank you to all of our podcast listeners. I'd like to ask everybody to please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. Thank you if you have donated already or joined as a member of the Rosenbach in the last few weeks. That really is how we get to put on this show every week. It's because of your support of the Rosenbach. So if you've not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. Let me introduce my co-host in full. Mary Alcaro is a PhD candidate in the Department of English at Rutgers University, where she is completing a dissertation on the Black Death's traumatic effect on 14th century literature. Sometimes Mary and I talk about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and not Sherlock in our conversations, which is great. An avid Sherlockian, Mary has been invested in the Baker Street Irregulars and Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes and currently co-leads the Sons of the Copper Beeches, Philadelphia's Sherlockian Scion Society. She has contributed essays to several books on various Sherlockian topics. And Mary's also a bartender and has created the Sherlock tales for these episodes. So I'm very happy to have you here, Mary. Also, before we get started, I'm gonna give away a copy of Michael Sims' Arthur and Sherlock book today to the first person who answers a trivia question at the mid-break. And today's question will be a Sherlockian question. Last episode, it was a Rosenbach trivia question. It's going to be a Sherlock question, but I'm still going to tie in the whole book publishing thing. So that's what it'll be. All righty. Mary, before we get started, for everybody, I like to do with every time the co-host is on first is to have you tell everybody what your Sherlockian story is.
Ooh, my Sherlockian story.
How did you get involved in this crazy Sherlock world?
Absolutely. I feel like my Sherlockian story is very similar to how a lot of people come to Sherlock Holmes. I was something about this age, right? I was 12. I hear this from a lot of people between like 10 and 14. Like it's like a very common time to come to the Holmes stories. But like I was a very like bookish kid, quiet kid, and voracious reader, always voracious reader. And I found my dad's copy of the canon at our house, and I just devoured it. I went through it cover to cover. And when I was coming to Sherlock Holmes, I think was possibly like the best time to come to Sherlock Holmes on the internet, because it was 2002. And so there was enough stuff out there that you could go through it all, but there wasn't so much stuff like there is now. Like you could never, ever get through.
Yeah, you can't get through
a quarter in a lifetime. But like in 2002, like the Baker Street web ring was still up and running, and like a lot of websites were in their infancy. And it still sort of had that like underground secret society kind of feel to it. So I came to the Sherlockian world and became aware of the Baker Street Irregulars and the Great Game and all this stuff pretty much on the heels of reading the story. So it was like these two things always existed together for me. Yeah. And so I sort of, like Monica, always knew that this was something that I wanted. This was something that I wanted someday to be part of this organization. And flash forward many years, I guess not that many years, I submitted a paper that I had written in college, like to the BSJ, just like randomly, just like sent it out there. I didn't know anybody in the Sherlockian world. And God bless Stephen Rothman, who is the editor of the BSJ, took a chance on this nobody college kid and published my essay in the Baker Street Journal. And I was over the moon. I got invited to an Ash Wednesday, which are the sort of informal gatherings of the adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes in New York City, where I was living at the time. And then the rest is sort of history. I met people at that very Ash get together that would be some of my dearest friends.
What did you write about? What was your first?
I wrote about the sign of the four. So it's perfect to have me on for this. It was about Eve Sedgwick's theory of homosociality. I'm sure I'll get into this later. It's like one of my favorite things to talk about, which is basically homosociality is the way that people of this who identify by the same gender interact with each other. And so she writes about, or she wrote about the triangulation through women, that a patriarchal male society in which men cannot share their feelings or share affection openly, they sometimes triangulate their emotions through a woman. Oh, I see Shelly Cat has made a celebrity guest appearance already.
You're being stalked, yes.
Of course. She'll be back, I'm sure. So yeah, the piece that I wrote was this sort of like pared down version of reading The Sign of the Four with an eye towards Sedgwick's homosocial triangles.
Do you find that your world is this kind of academic approach, or how do you, now let me ask the other way, how do you marry the academic world and the game world that's in the show?
It's so hard. Every time someone asks me to write something Sherlock Holmes related, my first question is always, are we playing the game?
Mm-hmm.
And you've talked about the great game on the show, but I guess if people are tuning in or weren't here, we pretend we engage with this belief that Holmes and Watson are real people, and that acknowledge. Yes, the sacred writings, the master and his disciple, and that's the great game. And so I always ask, whenever I get asked to write something, like, are we playing the game or are we not playing the game? And sometimes I get the fun answer of, well, it's up to you. And so I try to walk this kind of like razor's edge of how do we talk about characterization? How do we talk about relationships? How do we talk about the Victorian era without tipping my hand into either way, right? And a lot of that is reading, like, I mean, that's in some ways what the death of the author has given us, right? That we don't have to care about Doyle, literary agent, or at all. Because if the stuff is there, if they are who they are, it doesn't sort of matter. If we're reading John Watson's account or if we're reading Conan Doyle's account. But it is fun, and it is something that I sort of toggle between. My sister all the time is like, you're ruining things, right? Like bringing the academic lens to things. I ruin movies. That's what I do.
The game begins in the act. I mean, it's Ronald Knox's, biblical exegesis kind of, coming up with this thing. So it's applying the tools of exegesis, and
that's the fun of it.
To this world, and I just think it makes it richer.
I agree. The harder you lean into it, really, the better it is.
I just can't unacknowledge Doyle, so I have to.
So he's there.
I have to include him, and I'm just so interested in him as an author and how he puts things together. So I can never escape that.
Well, he could never escape home, so it's poetic justice in some way.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, before we start Sign of Four, let me have Mary, our Sherlockian mixologist, tell you about the Sherlock tale for this, which I am enjoying in this great Sundays with Frankenstein glass here. Tell us what the drink is and how did you come up with it?
The drink is the Agra Treasure, which I had so much fun with because I started with knowing I wanted a drink that was Agra, the initials, and I backformed. What could I put in a drink that started with AGRA that wouldn't be absolutely vile? And I experimented on my friends with this, as I am often want to do, especially with anything that is sort of whiskey based. This is my one character flaw. This is my biggest flaw as a obviously. This is my biggest flaw as a bartender. Is I appreciate whiskey, but I do not have a taste for it. So if it's bourbon, if it's scotch, if it's whiskey, on the palate, it's wasted on me. So I experiment on my whiskey loving friends. So the Agra Treasure is a rye whiskey base. That's our R, with it's 1 part rye whiskey, and then a half part Amaro, and a half part Aperol. And then you garnish, depending on how sweet you like it and what kind of Amaro you're using, with a little grenadine. So those are your AGRA.
Mine's a little heavier on the whiskey because that's
I was going to say it's a very brown Agra Treasure you've got over there.
I've got 3 Luxardo cherries at the bottom.
Ooh, oh, I love it.
That's my treasure at the end.
I love it. I love Luxardo cherries.
Totally going to get through this.
Oh, they're wonderful, and that they factor into a future cocktail that I workshopped early on in the summer for this show. So stay tuned for the next batch of cocktails.
You'll have more fun Sherlock tales for us coming up. So
I will.
Thank you. I enjoy this. You know, I did the cocktails and all the other shows, or most of them, and it's nice having someone else do them, and then me kind of almost being surprised every week by something that I really enjoy. So
you get the fun part. You get to do the taste testing of these cocktails.
I do. All righty. Well, everyone, you can find the recipe in the YouTube description for this episode. And I also send out the recipe via email every week for those who are registered for the show. And you can register at the Sherlock Mondays homepage on rosenbach.org. We also shared a PDF of a facsimile of the Sign of Four as it was originally published in Lippincott's magazine in 1890. You can download that on the Rosenbach Sherlock Mondays page as well. All righty. We finished, we got up to chapter 6 in the last episode, and we left our heroes at Pondicherry Lodge. Holmes has sent Watson off to escort Mary home. And then almost like, oh yeah, she's still here, isn't she? As they're doing their investigation, you better take her home. And he sends Watson off to take her home, which is the job that Watson was already volunteering for. But he also has told him to pick up the dog, Toby. So we get Toby today, I think.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I feel for Les, because Toby is also, I think, one of the best characters.
Yes, I know they were anxious. They wanted to talk about Toby last week.
I know. I was watching last week, and I was like, I'm going to get to talk about Toby now. I love Toby. I actually, I think I conned my family into naming our family dog Toby after this Toby. Our Toby was a little Jack Russell. But I was sneaking my Sherlock Holmes references in, and that one made it sort of under the. I didn't get Wishbone, but I got Toby.
Yeah, how many terrier Jack Russells out there?
I know, a whole generation of millennials.
Or they were Jack. Plenty of people call their Jack Russells Jack because
absolutely
give them the name already.
But regardless, a queer mongrel with the most amazing power of scent. Either way. So yeah, Watson goes to pick up
and there's where we are, chapter 7, episode of the Barrel. First, Watson's taking Mary
home.
And it's all about his love for her and her this, if she gets this treasure, then it's going to be an impasse. And also he's being he's being polite, and he says, like, he doesn't want to take advantage of her. He doesn't want to declare anything. He says it was to take her at a disadvantage to love upon her at such a time.
Doesn't want to be a mere vulgar fortune seeker.
Yeah. But he says, worse still, she was rich. I don't know if that's worse.
Problem, Watson.
But it is for him. I mean, this is
it is for him.
I mean, this Victorian age, and he's it's the part of class is wealth.
Oh, absolutely.
And she will then be in a different class than Watson, and he can't, and that's very upsetting, obviously, as it should.
Class dynamics are one of my favorite things to talk about in the Sherlock Holmes stories. So I'm glad you brought that up, and that will just continue to come up, especially in the second half.
We will, because they're not in a different, because that's what's fascinating about this, is they are, equal,
Yes.
in this class system. But the second she has that treasure,
it's a threat, right?
Yeah.
It really threatens to upend everything. Yeah, it's fascinating. And also there's, I think, this undercurrent, and it doesn't get addressed directly, but there is this undercurrent of Watson's injury, his war wound in all of this too, that there's a little bit of the language of disability in here.
Yeah.
You still have Holmes checking in with Watson and being like, well, do you think you're up for, that comes later in this chapter, right? Are you up for like a 6-mile walk?
Yeah.
He starts the novel complaining about the pain from the Giselle bullet in his leg / arm.
The magic bullet.
Magical bullet.
I had a great email from Max M, who sent me an email with the whole chart of the magic Giselle bullet going in and down and through the thigh.
It's just that screen grab of Charlie Day from Always Sunny standing in front of the board with all the
yeah.
But I imagine Watson describing how he got his war wound. But yeah, I mean, there's that sort of undercurrent to it too, that like he's not, the age difference, as you had established on the last episode, it is really not that large. It's
not that big an age difference.
Yeah, like 7 or 8 years tops, and that's nothing in this time period. But there's this sense that he's not like able-bodied, and he's very down on himself about that.
I was really surprised going back. Like, it just hadn't dawned on me that it was such a persistent thing, and he must mention it 3 or 4 times in Study in Scarlet, and he's mentioning it all through this, and that Doyle is, in the beginning, he's creating this character that it is an issue with his physical abilities, and can he do things. Now, of course, Sherlock is now going to become like superhero like in all the things he can do physically.
Well, the cocaine helps.
Yeah, well, yeah. But Watson is not, he just reminds us of it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but this is one of the things that the first season of BBC Sherlock really got right.
Oh boy, did they.
Episode really, I thought, dealt with it very well, and the sort of psychological aspect of it as well for John's character.
Exceptionally well done. Yeah. That whole first episode is
it's phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, this wounding in the leg too is it's also wounding in the leg and wounding in the thigh is historically euphemistic threat to masculinity.
Yeah.
And that sort of tie to castration anxiety. Look, I've been on for not even 10 minutes and we're already there.
And it's that thigh that is frequently a euphemism in the past for a groin injury, and even groin itself is like almost a euphemism for, when a man is shot in his testicles or penis, and like it is.
There's a threat to virility. There's a threat to masculinity and to manhood and to man's role in society. And I mean, certainly the Victorians are both super hyper conscious of this, and also not going to talk about it directly, or not going to talk about really anything directly. So that's very interesting too. I think that plays into the especially that the leg wounding is in this novel, that the wound is in the arm in Study in Scarlet, but the fact that it's the leg wound in here, because there's so much stuff going on.
And we're not saying that like he was wounded in the groin. It's just that it is that area tends to be, the thought behind it, the theme of it is the threat of it.
The threat of it. I think that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of this novel is the threat. Threats, outside threats coming in and threatening the male body, but also the body politic of the empire.
All right. We're gonna get into that, definitely.
We are, which is good stuff.
Well, Watson shows up to this address that Holmes has sent him to, for the dog in Pinchin Lane, number 3 Pinchin Lane, and we get this great funny exchange from the what's his name, the owner, Sherman.
Yeah.
and he won't let him in, and he's got this great dialogue where like W's or V's or W's.
Yeah.
So he's got a viper he's going to spring on him, which is a snake, and it's a wiper. Very Sam Wellerish. So
Yeah.
but that's that's the London dialect, or the Cockney dialect that Doyle is putting out here. And then he won't let him in, to finally, Watson gets out, "Mr. Sherlock Holmes." And of course, then he's
Why didn't you say so?
Yes. A friend of Mr. Sherlock is always welcome. Step in, sir. Keep clear of the badger before he bites.
With no teeth.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, this chapter just in general is a great little snippet insight into how the lower classes live, going into this sort of like seedier part of town, I suppose.
But also these odd things, like like little menagerie in the city, which you could have encountered in the Victorian age. And this is no modern pet store, and even pet stores are really going away in a sense. But the way that all these various, even what would be exotic animals to us,
right,
are all kind of kept there together.
Yeah.
But it's the dog that he wants.
It's Toby.
Who
doesn't look all that impressive. But
no, what's his description? Do you have that there, Toby proved?
I have the whole thing about him being a queer mongrel, but let me see where. Oh, here we are. Toby proved to be an ugly, long-haired, lop-eared creature, half spaniel and half lurcher, brown and white in color, with a very clumsy, waddling gait.
Yeah, this isn't a pretty dog. It's not a majestic dog. No. This is a mutt.
He's just a good boy.
This mutt has skills.
He does.
He is a good boy. Good boy, Toby.
He is a good boy.
Well, Watson picks him up and brings him back. Finds out everybody has been arrested now, even McMurdo.
Well, everybody who's a servant's been arrested. Holmes is somehow protected by his social standing. He's
just arrested everyone in the house.
I mean, when in doubt, just
Sholto and all the servants, you're all arrested. You're all in on it, and Holmes was standing on the doorstep with his hands in his pockets, smoking his pipe. Now, I love a pipe reference, but the difference here is that why I'm mentioning this is that actually this is the very 1890s. Men are starting to smoke their pipe in all kinds of places. Pipes especially, where all smoking was generally in the middle class or above, confined to certain times of the day, indoors, certain rooms. And now it's starting to be something that is spreading outside as well. Whenever you see a Sherlock movie and he's walking down the street with a pipe, that's not going to happen. But he is waiting, and so he even outside, and he can pull out his pipe and smoke it. And but it's a kind of slight change in the decorum of when and where you're supposed to smoke. But I also think it's Doyle recognizing that Holmes is the kind of guy who's going to smoke his pipe on the doorstep when no gentleman would have smoked his pipe on the doorstep.
A little bit of that bohemian soul comes out.
Which is exactly the kind of character that he is. And that's a little clue for the reader at the time would notice that, but
that's great. I've
not really
never
noticed now.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I'm so glad you filled me in on that, because I've actually never considered that, and I didn't know the sort of decorum surrounding.
I love the pipe stuff. I'll do a Sherlock and smoking Mondays, where we just talk about all the smoking. But I'm certain
a 300 pipe problem. It's an annual.
Nobody's going to tune in for that except me.
I think you'd be surprised. So Holmes is smoking when he comes up.
And he's got the dog, good dog then.
I'm not trusting this man around a dog after what happened last case, but we have a very short memory.
That dog was going to die anyway.
Yeah, I guess.
It was still upsetting. Luckily that it was not just a dog that they were just going to kill. That it was already doomed. So
Pour one out for the bullpup. But no, Toby and Holmes hit it off. He gives him the creosote handkerchief. He gets the scent.
Yeah, well, first Holmes does this thing where he climbs down the building, and off this giant, mansion that's there. I don't know how many, 2-3 stories, and he climbs down the building. It's more activity. It's this, that's the kind of detective he is. It's not just a sit in the chair thinking, coming up with here. He's not just the theorist, as Anthony Jones calls him. He's very active. And they have Toby smell the thing. Oh, they also find another thing that Holmes finds is he finds the small pocket or pouch woven out of colored grasses with a few tawdry beads strung around it. In shape and size, it was not unlike a cigarette case. Inside were half a dozen spines of dark wood, sharp at one end and rounded at the other, like that which had struck Bartholomew Sholto. So they find what they think are the rest of the poisoned darts. That
the dangers of the exotic world have now come to England. The threat is inside the country.
Well, they let Toby smell the creosote. People, creosote, this is something we maybe annotate. Creosote it's a kind of treatment. It's almost like a lacquer that you put on wood to preserve it, I think, to keep moisture out, perhaps. I think it used to be the stuff that they put on telephone poles, too, on the outside of telephone poles. But I don't know if they still do that. I don't even know if they put up actual wood telephone poles anymore. But it's a preservative for the wood, and it really reeks too. It's a little tarry, it's very sticky. And they let Toby smell it. Here you are, doggy, good old Toby. It's fun to see that kind of language in there.
So sweet.
That language is always there. And well, it's newly there in the 19th century, right? This is when dogs have become these kind of little family pets, that people cherish and treat like, family members. That mostly begins it becomes widespread in the 19th century, let's say.
Yeah, and we're still in that transition period in a lot of these stories, where the dog is only the dog that's kept up outside and not fed, and sicked on people as means of defense. So we're still seeing dogs as like useful, but also dogs as pets.
Yeah.
Jen Aker has a great thing on the good boys of the canon.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. It started as a part of I think it was I think it was a toast she gave at a BSI dinner, and it is all about the dogs. In the canon. I think she's written it up somewhere. It's probably in the Serpentine Muse.
Okay.
But anyway, good voice.
Well, Toby leads them through the city on the trail of the creosote. While they're doing that, Holmes continues to explain the story to Watson about like what he's been able to figure out so far. In fact, it's just how Jonathan Small is after the treasure from Sholto. Right. And he has an accomplice. He probably has an accomplice in the servants, right. Because that's the only way he would have found out that the treasure was discovered. So he would know to come and get it then. And Watson says, but that is mere speculation. Holmes says, it is more than that. It is the only hypothesis which covers the facts. And that's a very Sherlockian thing there, that he doesn't speculate, like he doesn't even like that word.
Right.
It's a hypothesis, which is a scientific word.
Science, exactly. It's the science of deduction.
Which is just guessing. He's still guessing.
Yeah, it's a fancy word. And he's still keeping Watson in the dark about who Jonathan Small's assistant is generous.
We again trace the it's a confederate in the household, the servant, but he hasn't told him, who the assistant is.
Right. We haven't had the big reveal, even though Holmes keeps saying, I don't mean to be theatrical. I don't mean to be dramatic. Yeah. I don't mean to, but he still won't tell us, and he still won't tell Watson.
and this is unlike what the short stories will be that are coming up, in that he's figured it out and told us already.
Yep.
And we're halfway done the story. So this isn't a big, usually his big reveal is at the end.
Yes.
And he reveals how he put it all together. They're the short stories. But in this longer tale, I think probably because this is more of an adventure tale in the sense that, it's longer and he wants this big action, like at least chase sequence that'll happen, and the action to follow, that we get the solution first and then the action of chasing down the criminal, which isn't usually what happens in a Sherlock story.
It's funny because I think from our position of these as like mysteries, and they're not all mysteries. And I was pointed out to me once that a lot of these stories start with the adventure of. A lot of the time, the mystery is less of a mystery than it is a problem that then ends in some sort of adventure or thing that has to be untangled. But it's not about the whodunit. And part of that is the genre still in its inception, detective fiction. I mean, you have Poe and you have Dupin before this, but we're not really in the conventions of what detective fiction is supposed to look like, what the mystery story is supposed to be yet. And that's kind of fun that we're sort of getting the ossification of Holmes as a character at the same time that the genre is coming to be. Yeah,
that Poe formula, Doyle doesn't start to follow until the short stories. And even there, he makes lots of variations and, but it is that basic formula. The pieces are in Study in Scarlet and Sign of Four. Yeah. But they're arranged in a way that they don't seem like the stories that Poe told, or the other examples, Monsieur Lecoq and others that had been before this. I don't want to get into the weeds of Holmes mentioning here, are you well up on your Jean Paul? And then this is fairly so. I work back to him through Carlyle. I don't want to get in the weeds of like explaining what those authors mean so much, but
it's a lot of name droppiness.
Yeah, I think. Well, Doyle, I think, likes to drop literary names, and I wonder if it's not part of his stating his engagement with literature. That and he chooses odd things sometimes too, like Winwood Reade, which happened in the last episode earlier in the book, and that'll happen again later. But I think it's Doyle. He's a literary writer, and he's read a lot and thinks of himself that way. He's not a magazine writer, I think, in his head, or it comes out anyway. Like he might not even be intentionally doing it, but I think he's throwing clues out here that I'm a literary writer because I refer to other authors.
And I quote in the original and I don't gloss.
Yes.
Which, is fine now. I went back and did these, and every time I reread these stories now, I have Google Translate in my pocket and can plug the quotes in and get my French and my German translated. But I remember reading these for the first time as a kid and just mystery, mysterious French, mysterious German. I don't know what this means. And they're fun if you translate them. What does he say about Athelney Jones earlier? That like the worst part is when the fool has like sense, or that when the fool has like can think or something like that. But it's like an offhand comment in French that he makes to Watson.
Yeah.
Which is so funny, right? You can see Holmes like quoting things in French, but like Watson doesn't seem like the quote in French.
Well, but in Study in Scarlet, Holmes didn't read any literature outside of criminology, right? And now, so there's two areas. This story is years later. Yes. Like he doesn't specify how long, but he just says it's years later.
Right.
So maybe Holmes has been reading up on that stuff by then.
He was mortified by that list going public.
That's the game way. I mean, the real way is Doyle's just like, no, he wants Holmes to be a polymath. Yes. And to know everything about everything. And so that's what starts to come through in Sign of Four. Holmes is a polymath. Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm concerned with the questions of the universe and nature and those strains, those seeds we see here.
And then There's also the mention here too, because this is an adventure tale, and you've got to, this isn't just a fun chase. It's, he asks Watson if he's armed. He has his stick. I have my stick. And Holmes actually has his revolver.
Yeah, and that's the shoe's
yeah.
usually on the other foot in the later story.
Yeah. Or does it say Holmes have a pistol? I don't remember.
Yeah, Holmes has the pistol.
Holmes has the pistol. Yeah.
Because
and with loaded it with 2 chambers.
Yeah.
Now, is that Holmes thinking like, there's 2 of them, I only need 2 shots?
Yeah, right. I never miss.
Yeah. So, but if the other turns nasty, because Holmes knows that it's not small that's the danger, it's
that other one.
He says that if the other turns nasty, I shall shoot him dead.
Yeah,
he's got loaded 2 of the chambers. So
yeah, it's interesting. Before we get into the irregulars, there's one thing I want to hit before we move on, and I love the way this chapter ends, with Toby going off on the wrong scent, and the 2 of them, the 3 of them, the two men and the dog getting to the waterfront, looking at each other, and just this moment where Sherlock Holmes and I looked blankly at each other, and then burst simultaneously into an uncontrollable fit of laughter. And I think we don't see enough of that like human side of Holmes, or the Holmes and Watson laughing and joking with each other. It's one of the things that I love so much about the Granada series, with Brett and David Burke in the beginning. I think it's Red-Headed League, where Jabez Wilson's is telling his story, and the 2 of them are like trying to keep a straight face, and then they start giggling uncontrollably. But it's, to me, like, even though we know this story is set several years, blah, 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 chronology, after studying Scarlet, these are still young men. Yeah. Like, they're still out there having a good time, laughing at their mistakes. They're getting the hang of things, and they're getting to be friends, and we're getting to see that. Not just in the rooms at Baker Street, and not just the like, oh, I'll come with you on this case, but the real like things that make the friendship tick. I just think it's a really, really sweet moment, and I love that it's there. They're having fun. They're having fun. Good dog, Toby. Poor Toby. Well, they realize that he's not going to lead them there, and he leads them to, and then they get Bo back, get on the right scent, and then he just leads them to as far as they can go. Yeah, to the water, and they realize they've taken a boat, but they're right next to Mordecai Smith's, who's got a steam launch, and Holmes, Holmes gets information in this fun way. First, he's nice to the kid, which you can't imagine is real. Like, he's not being serious, right? Oh, he does love his little Baker Street Irregulars. It's the what a rosy-cheeked young rascal that gives it away. That's not what a rosy-cheeked young rascal. No, he's not thinking that. But but the kid's got a great response. He says, "What would you like?" The kid says, "What would you like?" And he says, "I'd like a shilling." And then, "Nothing you would like better?" More? How about "I'd like 2 shillings better?" This kid's smart. Yeah, this kid gets it. A fine child, Mrs. Smith. Patronizing the kid and the mom, Mrs. Smith, and then he's able to get what he wants out of her by just kind of hinting along, about the steam launch, and then he explains to Watson afterward the main thing with people of that sort, which sounds a little demeaning. The main thing with people of that sort, said Holmes as we sat in the sheets of the wherry, is never to let them think that their information can be of the slightest importance to you. If you do, they will instantly shut up like an oyster. If you listen to them under protest, as it were, you are very likely to get what you want. So that really stark class differential. Yeah. I mean, it's good investigative technique. It is. But it does point out this, Holmes is operating on a different level sometimes than the people. Well, if it were a gentleman, you could ask a gentleman. A gentleman, by his word, would tell you, would aid in the investigation. He could handle either having some more information or could be trusted to communicate with someone in his class. But you know, if there's a gentleman sniffing around who's well dressed, giving out shillings to random kids that are running about, you don't want to get involved in whatever these gentlemen are involved in, and you don't want any trouble.
Well,
yeah, we see a lot of that, people of that sort.
yeah, and we'll see more in a second here, because as Holmes gets out to dispatch a wire, and he tells Watson, "You remember the Baker Street division of the detective police force, whom I employed in the Jefferson Hope case." I love how we get reminders all through this story of Study in Scarlet.
Listen, Watson's got to sell books. He's got
bringing it up, yeah.
and that manuscript.
But they were in that, and so they're going to come back now, and now we're back at Baker Street. And here's the reminder of Watson's injury: "I was limp and weary, befogged in mind and fatigued in body." You know, he's not all that active. This, you know, this up all night running through the city has really knocked him out. And and while he's waiting there, is he reading the paper first? Yes, he's reading the paper. Yeah, and it's about
what a great job Anthony Jones is doing.
His trained and experienced faculty. It's a newspaper story on the crime, but it's about Anthony Jones, whose well-known technical knowledge and his powers of minute observation have enabled him to prove conclusively that the miscreants could not have entered by the door or by the window, but must have, you know, come in through all the stuff that Sherlock pointed out.
Brilliant.
Yes.
And Watson's got that rather cheeky comment, right? Where Holmes is like, "Well, what do you think?" And Watson's like, "Well, I think it's lucky that we almost got arrested.
Yeah.
It's a good thing we weren't standing around."
He arrested everyone.
Everybody.
Was his, you know, way of catching them. Holmes also says this, we cannot, I'm sorry, this is the newspaper article. "We cannot but think that it supplies an argument to those who would wish to see our detectives more decentralized, and so brought into closer and more effective touch with the cases which it is their duty to investigate." And a little bit of a reminder there for us as readers now is that police departments and you know, police detectives, it's not that old. You know, it's been a few decades. I mean, earlier in the 19th century, since official police forces were formed as they exist now, and there were always issues with them. So, you know, and how much they get paid, and how connected they were to the underworld, and any kind of corruption going on. I mean, sometimes things that still go on. This was brand new for people, as they were still thinking about, how do you form a detective force, and how should they be in relation to the people that they're investigating?
Yeah, the press weighs in. It is an interesting way to close out the article.
Yeah. Well, at this moment, there was a loud ring at the bell, and I could hear Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, and I forgot to mention this in the last episode, where she is named for the first time in Sign of Four. They have a landlady in Study in Scarlet, but she's never named. But in chapter 1 of Sign of Four, she was named as Mrs. Hudson, and here she is, the name again. So, and here they come, the unofficial force, and then Holmes gives them, well, it's in the chapter title too, the Baker Street Irregulars. A dozen dirty and ragged little street Arabs. It's all the same language. It's like he has just lifted the exact same scenario from Study.
Yeah.
Just put it in here, even to the point where he tells them, "Oh, Wiggins, next time only you come up," which is exactly what happened in
last time.
Scarlet too.
Not gonna happen again.
So I don't know. I don't think I don't even think it's a, you know, like
a bit
being fun, like, oh, they didn't listen last time. I just think he's just lifted it and put it back in because he just needs to put it in there. And also who's read it, you know? I mean, as we get reminded of the other case all the time, I'm not sure that he's certain that many of the readers have read the first story.
That's true. The Irregulars are so interesting because the reason they can do all the things they can do is because they're invisible. They're invisible people. They're invisible children because they are young boys, they are poor, and they are quote unquote street Arabs. They're ethnically othered.
I mean, they seem more like, it seems more like it's the kind of, it reminds me very much of being India too, this kind of underclass who can do anything and who are invisible and nobody will pay them any mind.
Right.
But these kids, at least in London, we recognize that they're connected to other people at their level, other people in these lower classes that they can talk to and get information that they're not going to give to Holmes asking questions.
Yeah, and actually, Ed, it's really funny, if you hadn't called attention to the end of the newspaper article, I wouldn't be thinking about this, but the Baker Street Irregulars are really the decentralized force. They're really the intelligence agency that can go everywhere and see everything and report back, and they are truly decentralized, and they are truly undercover in a way that the official police force can't be. So that's an interesting sort of contrast point.
They are irregulars.
They're irregulars.
Wiggins is the lead. Holmes is going to send them off to find the Aurora, the steam launch Aurora, Mordecai Smith's steamboat, and that's it. Holmes utilizes the resources that the police are not utilizing. Now, I'm sure they are. Police are actually have informants at this time too, but he's making a big thing about it, that he can utilize this. And Athelney Jones thinks, oh, I don't need this. I'll just, I can figure it out on my own.
It does kind of make you wonder how Holmes wins their trust to begin with.
Yeah, well, is it just
yeah. But they do seem very loyal to him. I mean, I guess he's good to them, like compared to what they are used to.
They have become kind of iconic in this world. We will see how few times they actually exist.
Yeah, that's true. It's like Irene Adler.
So they but they're there this time, and they're going to go hunt the ship. If the launch is above water, they will find her, said Holmes as he rose from the table and lit his pipe because he's smoking a lot. And then I like this little thing here.
You're going to say exactly what I'm thinking.
Go ahead.
Toby gets the scraps.
Yeah, Watson thinks of feeding Toby.
I love it. Before they send the dog back. I mean, that's great for continuity, though. I mean, for an author who can't be bothered to remember Watson's first name, to remember the continuity that they have a dog and they have to get rid of the dog.
Yeah.
And there has to be the sort of transition between, we are at the breakfast table, we have sent the irregulars out, we have to go bring the dog back so that we can go do other things. Like, it's great continuity.
Doyle pays attention to these kind of realistic details that kind of help situate the stories in, especially for the readers, the real world and their world. And he does pay attention to that stuff, which is really good, especially for a writer who's describing a world that they all know. Holmes is not tired. I have a curious constitution. I never remember feeling tired by work, though idleness exhausts me completely.
Such a crack. I love it. Yeah.
I am going to smoke and to think over this queer business to which my fair client has introduced us. And so Holmes doesn't even need sleep.
Watson does.
Yes. And now they go in a little bit. Holmes is explaining who's the other man again. Watson says, like, come on, you haven't told me who this other man is.
Oh yes, we need the sort of the kind of old-timey
Holmes. Yeah, he describes them first. Diminutive footmark. Well, the clues that they have: diminutive footmarks, toes never fettered by boots, naked feet, stone-headed wooden mace, great agility, small poison darts. And Watson, the genius, like Watson doesn't look smart here. A savage. Like, really, that what you're, perhaps one of those Indians who were the associates of Jonathan Small. They I mean, that's also part of, the Watson. It's part of the formula that we have here. Watson can't figure anything out, and Holmes has to point it out to them. And he can't even figure out where he's from. And Holmes is like, it's the, Andaman Islands, and he pulls out the Gazetteer. Now, I'm sure, most people now don't know what or use a Gazetteer. It is a geographical dictionary, usually with maps, and it's the way they look things up in the 19th century. Place names, and there's usually an index in it, just all the names in the back, and then there's maps in it you can go to. But and also, I imagine how easy it must have been for things to go out of date.
Oh yeah.
Countries and how they're formed, and borders and what's where. But this is I love this because it's the Victorian way of ordering their world. Like the empire that they have is, look, we'll put all this information here, and now you can find it. And by the way, we own half of it anyway.
Yeah. How can we classify it? How can we, we are sophisticated people of learning, and it is our job to take up the white man's burden and control these territories. And now we will keep inventory. And we get that wonderfully horrible entry in the Gazette.
Yeah, these kind of biased comments about the Aborigines of the Andaman Islands.
Yeah, that heavy phrenology of the fact that they are sort of a race of people who are naturally hideous, having large misshapen heads, small fierce eyes, and distorted features. Right. This will come through again and again and again in these stories, is that you can ascertain things about a person's intelligence or character based on physical feature, racialized features, but also things like the size and shape of the head, or the symmetry of the face. And
also their character. They're fierce, morose, intractable, as if other people couldn't be that. That's not a common characteristic of any group of people. But also Doyle's making all this up too.
Oh yeah.
If you go to a Gazetteer from there and look up his place, none of that information's there. He's making this up for the story, but he's making it up in a way that is very common to people of the time, and how they would view indigenous peoples on an island.
And all the fears that the empire has, right? All the fears that the empire has of the dangers of abroad coming home, and the fear of cannibalistic feasts, all the bad stuff that can go wrong in the places that are not Mother England are wrong.
Yep. So Holmes has explained now the kind of companion that is with Jonathan Small, and now and Watson looks tired, so see if I can put you to sleep. And
yes, we have a very heterosexual passage about two bros, one playing the violin for the other as he falls asleep, and the bow bobs up and down. It's all very straight.
Began to play some low, dreamy, melodious air, and puts Watson to sleep. So on the soft sea of sound, thinking of the sweet face of Mary Morstan as he's going.
After we get the description of Holmes's gaunt limbs, earnest face, and rise and fall of his bow, let me get the face of Mary Morstan. It's very interesting. This is something that I've written about, and this is probably a time to plug my little BSJ article from ages and ages ago. But like that instinctive, here's this bond, here's these two guys, this one guy playing his friend to sleep on the couch, and he's thinking about his friend, and we were getting this catalog of Holmes's body, and then all of a sudden it's nope, gotta get the woman's face in there. We close out on Mary Morstan because we can't go down this particular path. We've got to triangulate whatever it is that's happening here with the female character. So I could go on about this and on about this, but I want to be invited back. So I won't.
Oh, I love hearing about it. but we've got the rest of the
Count that.
chapters to get through.
Yes.
And I'm sure we'll have more moments like this. But first, let me take a little moment here to ask everyone, or to let everyone know that to learn more about the Rosenbach, you can visit rosenbach.org. We host a variety of on-site and online programs and courses, and always welcome questions from listeners about how to use our collections. Our holdings are always accessible to researchers who make a free appointment to visit our reading room. Mary has visited the reading room to look at some Chaucer. How much did that cost you, Mary?
Nothing at all. And everyone was so lovely and so nice and so welcoming.
You went online, you filled out an appointment, and came in, and we brought 14th century, manuscripts out to the table for you.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
Got the newly rebound Canterbury Tales.
Yeah. The Rosenbach community reaches all around the globe, brought together by our love for history, rare books, manuscripts, and the arts. And I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do so at our website, or by becoming a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And you can also join us on our Facebook group page, Sherlock Mondays, for lots more Sherlockian info, news, links, conversation, and fun. And there's an audio podcast version of this show. Look for the Rosenbach podcast. And there's actually 2 Rosenbach podcast seasons before this one that you can go back and hear all kinds of fun stuff and interesting topics that we've had in our podcasts. Look for that wherever you get your podcasts, and the audio podcast for this show drops 1 week after the video ones. You can always write me at epettit@rosenbach.org. I love to hear from our audience, and I have heard from so many of you, which is great. Let's do the trivia question. So, dear stalker, from time to time, we're going to give away some books, and today we are giving away a copy of Michael Sims's Arthur and Sherlock to the first person who answers this Sherlockian trivia question, or Doylean trivia question, perhaps I should call it, in the live chat for the people that watch live. Here's the question. After The Sign of Four was published in Lippincott's magazine, it was serialized weekly in a British periodical. Name that periodical. A clue is that the illustrations for that serial included one, or actually 2 illustrations, in which Sherlock wears a deerstalker hat. First time ever. It's not mentioned in this story either yet. The illustrator of the story put a deerstalker on his head. How about that? So it was serialized first in Lippincott's, it was published first in Lippincott's magazine, Sign of Four. Then it was serialized in a weekly in a British periodical. Name that periodical. Someone has answered The Strand, but it's not The Strand. This is a real trivia question. So we'll see if someone comes up with that. And when they do, the winner can drop me a line at epettit@rosenbach.org. And I'll keep looking at the answers to see if someone comes up with it. Or our chat, Mrs. Hudson, can let me know if someone comes up with, I don't think I gave her the answer, so she won't know. So I'll have to keep an eye on the answers here as they come up.
Or long-suffering Mrs. Hudson.
Yes. So I'm sure there's a couple Sherlockians in the audience that know, but they're thinking like, I've already got Michael Sims's art. So I'll even show one of the illustrations. Here they are. Yeah, because they're not labeled, so I can show them. And here it is. Oops, can you see this? Hold on, let me try that again. Beautiful. Can you see that? Good. Here they are walking Toby.
Toby.
This hat, and you can't see it as much in this hat, but this next picture, there it is. Holmes wearing a deer, and he has a mustache.
Mustache. It's very Poirot of him.
Yeah. And he's got a mustache, but Holmes and a deer stalker. Odd. It's not mentioned in this story at all. But he is up. We have the answer. And the first person to get it is Madeline. Madeline Quinones, the Bristol Observer. Well done, Madeline. Madeline, shoot me an email at epettit@rosenbach.org, and I will get your address and send you a copy of Michael Sims's Arthur and Sherlock. All righty. Back to the story. The chapter 9, a break in the chain. Well, there's been no news of the Aurora. They returned Toby. Boo. Like, we don't get any more Toby. But Watson then pays a visit to Mary.
And Holmes has something very lovely to say. I have a prop for this. Holmes says, women are never to be trusted never to be entirely trusted. Not the best of them.
Not the best of them. Yeah, that's like a brag now, right?
Well, that's why I have this. I picked this up at Denny Dobry's place at his annual book fair for the BSI Trust. And I was like, oh, if I have this, it will not fall into the wrong hands because it's already in the worst possible ones. Watson has a great follow-up to that statement, though. I love that Holmes is this like very misogynistic, like, you can't trust women, and Watson just says, I did not pause to argue over this atrocious sentiment, and then just moves on.
Then it just leaves and goes off to see her. So, and we'll have this from Holmes too. It's it's clearly a misogyny, and it's a misogynistic statement to make. But Holmes really distrusts. Well, we're going to deal with this in Scandal in Bohemia. That's what we're going to happen. So, because it's something that will keep coming up, and what we wind up here is this big difference between Holmes and Watson, right? Watson is interested in romantically in women, and Holmes is only interested in his work, in solving crimes and doing this kind of work, and anything that interferes with it is upsetting, except maybe a friendship with Watson, because that he seems to be okay with.
Well, Watson's work, Watson counts. He just encompasses, he gets sort of grandfathered into that.
We'll play Watson to sleep, but
but no girls. Gross.
No girls.
He is an aesthete, it is interesting to me the way that Holmes's sort of bohemian ways are coded. I don't know. It would be interesting.
Well, Watson is very interested in Mary, and she is seeming to be with him too, which is what he discovers. But to move along, when Holmes returns, Mrs. Hudson is concerned for Holmes, because he hasn't slept and he's just pacing around all the time and muttering and acting very odd. Because Watson's like, I've seen him like this before. He's on a case.
Watson's like, at least he's not on cocaine again. Like, this is fine. He's just pacing. He's not shooting up the wall. He's not shooting up himself. Fine. He's fine. Leave him alone.
Well, Holmes says this infernal problem is consuming me because he's not getting any answers. Nobody's been able to find the Aurora yet. So he does his chemical experiments, another signifier for Holmes. This is what he does in his time when he's trying to when he's trying to take his mind off of working on a case. And then he leaves. He puts on this rude sailor dress with a pea jacket, scarf, and he says, Watson, I'm off down the river. And Watson sees the newspaper And again, there's it says a reference to the Upper Norwood tragedy. Just when they've let everyone go. No,
I think
they're
most
just. Oh yeah,
left two of them.
Dolto and the housekeeper were released. So
The white people. They let the white people go.
there you go. So, well, McMurdo, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, he's Irish though. Matt's
That's
debatable.
true. Yes.
Right? Like the Irish are, this is their whole whiteness is a construct thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, poor McMurdo.
Watson notices an advertisement in the agony column.
We love the agony column.
And the agony column, for everyone who doesn't know, is it kind of started as like a reader complaint column, like this is what's wrong in the world, and then in the newspapers, but it evolves over the 19th century into this like public forum for missing persons.
Yeah, it's like a lost and found.
Coded messages sometimes, and like it's complete like cryptogram, and you have but the person who you're writing it to will know what it is. Hugely popular. It was entertainment for people too, so much so that it was in the front page. The London Times put it on the front page of the paper. The second column was the agony column, and all this. And here it's lost. Mordecai Smith is lost, and his wife wants to know. But also, if people could let any information know at 221B Baker Street. So it's obvious Holmes has put this in there, and Watson realizes that Holmes didn't even tell him. But we have this curious little passage here where Watson starts to have his doubts.
Yeah.
And that's surprising to see that I like that Doyle added this, that Watson thought maybe there was some radical flaw in my companion's reasoning. Maybe he's suffering from some huge self-deception. It's I think something that never we'll see if it happens later, but I can't recall it. Like
very early career, right? It's still it's again, whatever the dating is, this is the second story we get, and this is Holmes and Watson still figuring each other out, and Watson is still in disbelief over Holmes' skills a little bit, and he's not like Holmes has not solidified his reputation as like infallible. We haven't seen him lose. We haven't seen him be bested, but he's still sort of figuring things out. I think of this moment a lot as my favorite James Bond movie, which is Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. And one of the many things I love about that movie is in the very beginning of the chases, he's not nimble. Like he barely makes it. Like he'll in chase scenes, he'll like jump onto something and like almost fall off. And like he's not James Bond yet. Like he's James Bond, but he's not like 007 James Bond yet. Is just coming into the establishment of his character, and he's still prone to error. And we're still in this phase of
Holmes is not prone to error.
No.
It's that Watson thinks that he could.
Right. The construction of that character isn't quite solidified yet. We don't know as an audience whether we can be like, well, Holmes will figure it out.
But he has to do it himself, though, because actually the only error that occurs is all his other avenues are not working.
Right.
And then he has to dress up in a costume and go out and figure it out.
And poor Watson, I remember this time through that he actually literally tells us what Holmes is wearing when he leaves.
Yes. And then first Athelney Jones shows up.
Right.
The inspector, police inspector, gets a whiskey and soda. Sure, I'll have that half glass.
I'm on the clock.
Really thirsty.
Yeah.
And he waits for Holmes. He can't figure things out. He gets a he's gotten a telegram from Holmes to go to Baker Street, wait for me. And then some old sailor comes up, knocks on the door, comes in, and Watson gives him this long description. It's not Holmes, of course.
I'm just wearing the same coat.
And then he tries to leave, and they detain him. And
He's
And
wheezing about and complaining that they're detaining him, and he's being
Jones,
mistreated.
Jones and Watson are talking, and then suddenly Holmes's voice comes in. I think you might offer me a cigar too. And it's Sherlock. It's a little silly, but it's something that will happen repeatedly, and it's Doyle really emphasizing how great a disguise, how great an actor Holmes is in the disguise he can put on and his voice, and how it can really fool people into not realizing that it's him. And it's an important trait to have for him being, a detective.
Yeah, because he can, if he can't go places as himself, he'll have to go in disguise, because we know that we can't get information out of these sorts of people by asking directly, and where direct inquiry fails, he may have to go undercover, and so he has to be sort of rough and tumble sailor. He wants to be able to communicate with those classes.
Well, Holmes makes a deal with Jones, and he which shows a lot of power on his part. He's got a lot of leverage here because he's figured it out, and Jones hasn't. So Jones has to let him. Holmes says the police are going to get all the credit. I'm going to lead you to him, but Mary has to see the treasure first, and I get to interview Small first. And and Jones is like, yes, so we can catch them, because this is the newspaper every day about how I'm investigating it. Jones has to finish this case.
Running out of people to arrest.
Yeah. So let's get to the chase. We get to the chapter 10 here, the end of the Islander.
I love the beginning of chapter 10 as well for those little domestic scenes, because it's Holmes at his most charming, and he says to Watson, "You have not recognized my merits as a housekeeper." And he is charming and witty and talks about things that have nothing to do with the case, and he can not be in his own head about just one thing, and he's gregarious and engaging, and Watson is like surprised, and I think we're surprised, but I love this. We get a young Holmes, we get a happy, excited, excitable Holmes that like a little neurodivergent kid just wants to tell you about all his hobbies, and he does.
Our meal was a merry one, and Holmes is not, again, as he was ignorant of everything in study. Yeah. Now he's not. Now he's the polymath.
Like, let me tell you about medieval pottery and miracle plays.
So, and yeah.
It's just like, okay, we are a captive audience, Holmes. The wine is great. You're going to lead us to this case. But I just think it's very sweet. It's a young Holmes who's still getting his feet. And I love that. But yes, the chase is soon to be on.
Yeah, they go out now. Watson takes his old service revolver.
Oh man.
Pockets that, and Holmes gives an account of his investigation, his logic and guessing, how he knew and what Small had done. So it's another showcase of, and we'll get much, and later in the short stories, then all this stuff gets put to the end. Here we've got it spaced out all through as Holmes going through this whole story of how he's figured everything out. But Holmes also knows they need to be very careful in the arrest here of him, that they can't just rush in, that Small's very, Small is a pretty shrewd fellow. He would send a scout on ahead, and if anything made him suspicious, he would lie snug for another week. So they've got to do this just like Holmes says they're going to do it in order for them to catch him. I know there's another Winwood Reed thing here. I'm going to go past it and post about it on Facebook. But because the chase is on.
The chase is on. It's very exciting. They take the green lantern off the side of the boat so no one knows it's a police boat.
And it's 2 steam launches going as fast as they can down the Thames.
It's shockingly exciting reading a steamboat chase.
This is Steve McQueen's bullet car chase, in the
Aston Martin.
It's Fast and the Furious. like zooming car.
Full edition.
Yeah, this is like shoveling coal into the furnace there to get more steam up. And they start to catch up to him, and it's exciting though. I like the pace of this. this whole chase. It is very thrilling.
It's better read because if you see two steamboats going down the river, I think it can't nearly live up to that.
Think that, yes, but and it's super fast for they're flying down the river in these steam launches. They finally get close enough and they can see one man. Watson says, one man sat by the stern with something black between his knees over which he stooped. Beside him lay a dark mass which looked like a Newfoundland dog. And then old Smith, Mordecai Smith, is stripped to the waist, shoveling coals for dear life. I think it's his son is steering the boat. And every now and then, the man in the stern still crouched upon the deck, and his arms were moving as though he were busy, while every now and then he would look up and measure with a glance the distance that separated us. Then he would shake his fist like, you curses. Very funny. And then there was a movement in the huddled bundle upon the deck. You got that part there? Read that.
The huddle, yes. At the sound of his strident, angry cries, there was a movement in the huddled bundle upon the deck. It straightened itself into a little black man, the smallest I have ever seen, with a great misshapen head and a shock of tangled, disheveled hair. Let me keep going.
Yeah.
Holmes had already drawn his revolver, and I whipped out mine at the sight of this savage, distorted creature. He was wrapped in some sort of dark ulster or blanket, which left only his face exposed, but that face was enough to give a man a sleepless night. Never have I seen features so deeply marked with all the bestiality and cruelty. His small eyes glowed and burned with a somber light, and his thick lips were writhed back from his teeth, which grinned and chattered at us with half-animal fury.
Yeah, very racist, very colonial, race. Yeah. This kind of colonial racism coming on. This is the savage creature from another country. This is the reason why we are taking these countries, and
this is the white man's burden, right? This is the fear of what will come to England and what will happen to the empire if we don't go on our quote unquote civilizing mission.
And the answer here is fire. If he raises his hand, fire first is the solution here. And they do. Tonga puts the tube up to his lips, and our pistols rang out together, and he falls into the water. I caught one glimpse of his venomous, menacing eyes amid the white swirl of the waters. He's dead, and then they chase the boat in and to the kind of the shores of the mud and the marshes, and Smith tries to escape and is caught. But this image here too, somewhere in the dark ooze at the bottom of the Thames lie the bones of that strange visitor to our shores. And there I almost hear that kind of criticism of empire, right? Like this is the aftermath. This is what happens. It's a telling metaphor for the British Empire and their treatment of natives. Like there's, their bones are lying in at the bottom of the Thames, and
it's there. And of course, we'll revisit this when we talk about the treasure. But this is what's at the bottom of it
all. And it was a good thing they shot him, because they noticed right behind him one of those darts is sticking in.
We were justified. And and everybody's fine, and there's no remorse. And Watson's like, "Whew, I was so scared that we almost died."
Yep. But no, it turned me sick to think of the horrible death which had passed so close to us that night. I mean, that's really strong. I mean, Watson's, we'll see if we get that kind of Watson later in stories. I don't think we do. I mean, this is, Watson it's almost like a weakness still in him that, he can't, it's, that was tough. Like, almost couldn't.
Still new to this.
Got the vapors.
Get the brandy.
Quick, the brandy. Chapter 11, 2 chapters ago, the Great Agra Treasure.
Not to use the drink.
we finally visit. We have Small here. Holmes meets him lighting a cigar. And I am sorry that it has come to this. I mean, Holmes treats him with respect right off the bat. Offers him a cigar, offers him a drink from the flask. Holmes gives respect to these people. He can't, not all of them, but for Small he is. And Small immediately claims innocence in the death of Bartholomew Sholto. That it wasn't his fault. That
Tonga couldn't be controlled.
Yeah. And he then he says he says he's honest and he's going to tell them the truth. And then he mentions about the Agra treasure, which never brought anything but a curse yet upon the man who owned it. And this kind of curse of colonialism, which shows up here in Doyle's stories. Right.
You've brought something from where it was to where it doesn't belong, and it's brought a curse with it, because you've displaced what shouldn't have been displaced.
A theme in lots of British stories of colonialism in the late 19th century, that things are cursed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a weird intersection of ambivalence about the colonial project and its level of success, while also justifying the project. It's very interesting.
Doyle's not blind to it.
No.
So it's there, it's mentioned.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But yeah, it gets brought back in the way that Tonga also gets brought back and causes nothing but trouble.
I've skipped my refill. I just skipped the Amaro. I'm just rye and Aperol now.
I'm like, that's a very brown Agra treasure you got.
It's just going to take me longer to get to the cherries at the bottom. Also, Jonathan Small doesn't want Mordecai Smith blamed. He's not at fault. I mean, Jones is magnanimous here in a sense that Smith is,
yes.
Small is like, I'm not going to let anybody take the blame if they don't need it.
Right.
Athelney Jones comes in and he's very magnanimous, like, no, don't worry, no one will be,
Not like I was arresting everyone.
Yeah.
Like a couple pages ago.
And then they ask him for the key to the treasure box, and he says, I threw it away. It's in the bottom of the river.
Mm-hmm.
Then he gets to take it to Watson, gets the treasure. He gets to take it to Mary, opens the box. She listened with parted lips and shining eyes to my recital of our adventures. When I spoke of the dart, which had so narrowly missed us, she turned so white that I feared she was about to faint. Watson's really pulling at her heart here. And then they open the box and she flings back the lid. We both stood gazing in astonishment. The box was empty. Treasure is lost, Miss Morstan says calmly, and she's thank God. Watson says, because I love you, Mary, so truly as ever a man loves a woman. Because this treasure, these riches sealed my lips. And then all I'm thinking is like, wait, is this a kissing book?
I love a Princess Bride reference.
Yes. So,
yes, and then then I say thank God too, she whispers, right? Whoever had lost a treasure, I knew that I that night had gained one.
Yes. So that's it. Then that's it. That's all we need for the romance in a Sherlock Holmes adventure. Holmes would be furious when he read the account of this. What is this?
He's going to be, but this has been foreshadowed, right? Yes. Because when this novel opens, Holmes complains about the romance that's found its way in. You put romance in a tale, and Watson's like, well, the romance was there. I couldn't keep it out. And here, once again, the romance, this time romance with a little lowercase r, intrudes upon the narrative, as we are sort of set up to know is going to happen.
Well, we'll go a little long tonight, but just a little long because we're at
Just
the
a
last
little.
chapter. We're at the last chapter here, and we'll get Small. It's the strange story of Jonathan Small, and we'll get his whole story here. The and it is a story of. We don't need to go into all particulars of the story because you've read it, but it is, how Small comes to get the treasure. He gets, the two native soldiers, force him to come along with him, but they all make a fair deal, and they're all, in on it. And Small isn't out to take anything away from these, native soldiers in India where he is, and they're going to share the loot. But the couple interesting things that happens before Small tells the story is that he gives his life story, and it's his kind of, his history within the British Empire. He goes into the army, he loses a leg, and then he goes to work on a plantation as a plantation overseer in India. And this is that whole kind of white man's burden, part that hits in this story that's so common to these stories in the 19th century with the British Empire. The owner of the estate is Mr. Abel White, which is really, did you mean that on purpose? To give him that name, the benevolent plantation owner.
Yep.
And it is
that's a brutal scene too, where we find once the rebellion happens, and I mean, I'm shocked at this going through this time because I had forgotten that they describe how the plantation owner and his wife had been brutalized.
It's what became known as the Great Mutiny in India, a real historical event, just like Watson's, second Afghan war in the first story. But it's basically the natives were finally fed up with their rulers and rebelled. But it's I love how it's labeled by the British Empire as the Great Mutiny, not a rebellion, because people could sympathize with the rebellion, but a mutiny is clearly illegal.
What side you're on?
Yes, and
it's always the threat to the women are women, right? Like this description, I found it was Dawson's wife, and this gets a little graphic, but all cut into ribbons and half eaten by jackals and native dogs. Like, for this to happen to our women folk, really helps justify the colonial project and the imperial project.
And it's later when Small meets the other, the other soldiers, and he realizes that one of them was in the Chillianwala conflict, and it's like everybody, there's all these, and which is a battle in 1849, and I'm like, wait, how many Anglo wars did the British engage in the 19th century? And it turns out, I looked it up, and it's at least 55 up to the time this story is I mean, it's the Second Candian War, the first Ashanti War, the first Anglo-Burmese War. I mean, when you're having to say first in them,
it's not good.
The first Anglo-Sikh War, the second Xhosa War, the War of the Axe. What the heck is, the Battle of Stymied? It's just, it goes on and on, and then the Crimean War, the Second Opium War. I mean, it's on and on and on. And this is an empire that is constantly in battle in creating this colonial empire. And this is, one of the incidents in it that happens is this mutiny happens, this rebellion happens rather, and it finally gets quelled, and what happens is what it does is it finally ends the East India Company's power in India. And it was funny, I was looking up these wars, and some of them, it's like, it's not the British government going to war, it's the East India Company going to war, because the East India Company was in charge of India. And after this, the British government said, no way is this private company going to be in charge of this. This is now part of our empire. And this is, I think it's the beginning of the end of the East India Company, in a sense, at least having that kind of power that they had wielded before.
That also
Well,
reminds you that there's resistance in these places, right?
yeah.
That whenever there's an empire, there are people who are there first who are resisting.
Well, Small makes a deal with these native soldiers whose names are a kind of
Yeah, not
it's
particular.
Muhammad Singh and Abdullah Khan, and then their friend then the third one who comes is
I'm trying to redo the sign of the four in my head. Let's see. Abdullah Khan, Muhammad Singh, and Dost Akbar.
yeah, and then he's the one that comes with the merchant, and they steal his money, and then they murder him and steal his money. And Small is, complicit. I mean, it's, he doesn't hide that, yes, he helped kill him. And it is, but it's the treasure that they offer him that he can't, he can't say no to. I mean, and that's the purpose of empire.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's invade, take the treasure, go back home.
Yeah.
And so that's what he wants to do. And he's happy to participate in the murder. Watson is very indignant about this.
Yeah. Watson in these stories, and I'm glad that we have it here because it is a through line for these stories, is that Watson is the moral conscience of the reader, how we're supposed to react. Watson is is usually a British jury. I think
he conceived the utmost horror of the man, not only for his cold-blooded business in which he had been concerned, but even more for the somewhat flippant and careless way in which he narrated it. Whatever punishment was in store for him, I felt that he might expect no sympathy from me. And then he has to mention that when I looked at Sherlock Holmes and the same disgust was written upon his face. I wonder.
Yeah, right?
Holmes doesn't talk to Jones, doesn't talk to Small as if he is disgusted with him.
Right, he's interested in the puzzle. He wants to get his loose ends tied up. He's not, it's funny, right? Because Holmes negotiates and restores order to the empire, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not interested. He's not involved. He cares about the problem.
Yes. And now it's been solved.
Right.
And Holmes wants to hear the rest of it and get the final details. Well, just before that, just this note that he gets sent to the Andaman Islands, Small does, and his Confederates, and they're in prison there. Then they tell the story to Sholto and Morstan, and Sholto winds up robbing everybody. And then he escapes. Even when he escapes, when Small escapes, he murders another, guard there, but it was a native guard, so it was okay because he was always mean to me. And then and he escapes with Tonga, and they have these he says, then we have, well, if I were to tell you all the adventures that my little chum and I went through, I'm like, I don't know. I kind of want that. I want the adventures of Small and Tonga.
I know.
Going through the world, like an adventure a week TV show.
Everyone's favorite colonial series.
There you go.
It's wild though, right? Because we're supposed to hate Small, and Small does things that are overtly horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But he also refuses to cut a deal with the other white soldiers that cut out his people that are the native soldiers. He's like, no, you can have a fifth. We'll cut you in, but I'm not doing anything without them. Yeah. And he also Tonga helps him escape, but he takes Tonga with him.
Yeah.
So it's just it's very interesting. The way that you could read that almost as sympathy for the native cause, but you could also read that as the colonies sort of contaminating.
Yeah.
Small.
Well,
he's gone.
Small's not completely contaminated because Tonga then kills Sholto. That's
and he's mad about it.
Beats him, and he's mad at him. But of course, then they're together on the boat at the end. And you can imagine I'm just mad at you.
I know.
But then they're going to go off on their adventures again.
Yeah. It's very strange.
They were going to South America, right? So he finally tells the whole story, and then here's this winds up being like Sherlock's biggest brag, the whole thing. He's like, there's nothing at all new to me in the latter part of your narrative, except that you brought your own rope. That I did not know. Like, oh, I knew everything except that the rope was yours. Thank you. So
Watson's like, they killed how many people? And Holmes was like, oh, you brought your own rope. Got it. Because that's what he's just fact checking.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, oh, and also the dart. Then he winds up the dart. Like, how did he have another dart? And it's like, oh, I thought he left it. Oh, he had one in the pipe already. So there you go.
And Holmes misses that, right? He's like, oh, I didn't even think of that, which is, I think, a hilarious detail. That he's accounted for everything, but not that the guy who shoots poison darts has one loaded. Fascinating to me.
Well, after they sit some times in silence, they Watson, the Small's arrested and taken away, and Watson says, well, that's all for me. I'm going to marry. Miss Morstan has done me the honor to accept me as a husband in perspective. And Holmes, of course, says, I really cannot congratulate you.
That's the nice thing you say to your best friend when you find out he's engaged.
Yes. Holmes is, she's charming, but might have been useful in other work we're doing. Remember, she saved all the right papers, the envelope she included.
Yeah.
And, but, she's Holmes I would never marry myself unless I bias my judgment. Love is an emotional thing. Whatever is emotional is opposed to that true cold reason, which I place above all things. So, well, that's the breaks. So the end of the partnership. It just started.
But you can't just have these two gentlemen running around London together, living together. You can't have it.
And it's going to be over already. And then Holmes, is it Holmes or Watson does the Goethe quote here?
I think it must be Holmes. I think Watson's not that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like there could have been two. Like there's enough for like a good man, and then some leftover for like a not.
Alas, that nature made only one man of you, and when there was material enough for a good man and a rogue.
A rogue, yeah.
Another quote at the end of a story that, like, Doyle seems to want to do this, but it doesn't really tie in that well.
No,
it's a real stretch for it.
It's an odd quote to put there, I think.
Yeah. Watson says, I get a wife out of it. Jones gets the credit. Pray, what remains for you? You want to give us the last line?
For me, said Sherlock Holmes, there still remains the cocaine bottle. And he stretched his long white hand up for it. Full circle.
I'm telling you. And, if you're reading Sherlock for the first time and you didn't expect he was going to shoot up cocaine at the end,
beginning and the end,
as a kind of, we're
going to punctuate the case.
Yes. It's time for a little cocaine.
That's incredible. This is probably my favorite case. Yeah. So I'm really excited that you brought me in to do part of it. So thank you for that.
Good. You're very welcome. And that's it. So another case, but I do think it's interesting that it really seems like Doyle is wrapping this up.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see this later in Sherlock Holmes stories too, but he's wrapping it up. He's like, that's it. Watson's going to go off and be married. Yep. So that's it for this, story that I've created. I brought it back once. I'm not, that's all. I'm writing the White Company right now. I'm writing this set about 14th century, medieval war. That's what I'm serious stuff. So no more of this, but I still love this story. I mean, there's problematic. There's all kinds of, awful things in it, but from the time, but it is, we were last week, and and it's not one of Les Klinger's favorite stories, and it's still a favorite of mine.
It's fascinating to me. I mean, because in large part because a lot of this problematic stuff that we see as important, it's a little like a time capsule, because there are things that Doyle clearly recognizes as problematic and behavior that's abhorrent, but there's other things that's just as normal as describing the breakfast table that we see as outrageous, that was just normal. I'm thinking about the yellow fog, right? Like that's just how it is. That's just the weather. I'm like, guys, your city's like really polluted. Maybe you should do something about that. It's great to see aspects of this world as problematic as it actually was.
Mhm.
In one place, and to be able to look back at the past in a real sort of way.
And what we've had in both Study in Scarlet and this too is this creation of Holmes and Watson, and there have been some changes now in this second story, and this is a lot of what we're going to get for a while with Holmes and this kind of very bohemian, not strictly normal middle class person in the British Empire, and Watson will but it's we have all the kernels now, and this story and the way he investigates and everything about it I loved in this story. So
it's a great case. Thank you again for having me on. It's been a joy.
You are welcome. Well, Sherlockians, thank you for joining us for this episode of Sherlock Mondays. You'll be back in a few weeks, man, for episode 7, right? A Case of Identity.
Oh, that's a fun one.
That's what you're coming back for. Good. Coming up next week, everyone, Monica Schmidt will return to talk about the first of the Sherlock Holmes short stories in the Strand magazine, illustrated by Sidney Paget. We'll definitely look at some of the Paget illustrations in the next episode too. It's a scandal in Bohemia. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. How's that for a first line for a story, right?
Great opener. Great story.
Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Hudson, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. Thank you to our sponsor, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to this channel, like these videos, and if you're listening to the podcast, leave us a review. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Ed.
I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks, everyone.